Welcome to the lore tours of Invictus 2952. This is where I walk the floor and tell you about the history of the ships and their creators. So join me on the floor for your tour. Welcome back to the floor of Invictus 2952. My name is Paul, Berserker01, Batman Shelley, your humble host and space bartender at the Astropub, and your tour guide here on the floor for the floor of Invictus. So what lore tours are where I go along the floor and I talk about all the various companies and their ships, their histories, where they came from, all of the lore behind these various vehicles in the game. There are three companies that we're going to be talking about today. The first one is Crusader, the second one is Misc, and the last one's going to be Tumbril. Luckily, they kind of split everything up into a nice, neat package, so I might be jumping around here a little bit, and I might skip, like, I know there's a Nova tank right in front of me, but I'm not going to talk about the Nova until we get to Tumbril, because there's another Nova tank down below the where all the ground vehicles are. So, without any further ado, let's begin. Let me actually continue to plug, because I need to start plugging. People have asked me to do a Ko-fi, so if you do want me to do a Ko-fi, which is a kind of a one-time donation thing you can do for helping out the channel, let me know in the comments. But I also have a Patreon where you can do multiple months ahead of time, individual months to help support the channel. All of that money is going to get an editor to help me edit longer videos and exclusive videos for patrons, as well as other bunch of small perks to help out as well. So thank you all for watching so far. There's been a significant increase in new people coming in and watching these videos, people coming in from obviously Invictus, learning a little bit more about the lore, and it's nice to have you here. Remember, hit that subscribe button if you've been enjoying these videos. Hit that like button to help spread it around. Show your friends and org mates these videos if they're interested in any of these ships or the lore behind the game, or if they might be interested in the lore. And as always, comment down below. Let me know what you think about any of these ships and anything else. If you have questions about the lore, I'll do my best to answer them. And I don't say this enough, but I always read every comment. I don't always respond to every comment, but I read every comment. So without further ado, let's get started with Crusader Industries. So Crusader Industries is a complicated topic because it is not really the story of one company. It's the story of a man by the name of August Dunlow, who was born in 2770 in the Croshaw system, the first system that humanity had discovered after Earth, or after the Sol system. He was born on Angeli, and he was born to middle class, decent, hardworking folk from the middle class of Croshaw, and went to a private school, had a lot going for him. But when his school took the day off to go watch the Imperator, Emperor Messer X, who was coming to inaugurate his grand project, which was Kano Stadium, this big sports complex where people could watch sports being played, and it was this big grand thing for the people. The son and daughter of Messer X, Linton and, I want to say Lydia, but I think it's the wrong one. But yeah, son and daughter, Linton and his sister, both started a coup at this right moment. So August Dunlow watched as the Messer sped by, and shortly after this, the Messer X was killed. And in the brutal aftermath of this coup, his mother was killed, and his father was critically wounded. They didn't have money at the time, cash. They weren't flush with cash enough to get his father help, and a lot of people were injured, so they couldn't really do that. So August did his best to try to go find work to try to pay for medical upkeep, but their house was destroyed in the insurrection. So eventually his father would pass on within a couple of months of him trying to take care of him. He was 12 at the time, by the way. So this messed him up pretty badly. And he was lucky enough to be swooped up by a group called Angeli's Angels and brought into a orphanage to be raised with a bunch of orphans. And he used his drive, his passion, and his own experience, his own negative experience with the Mezzers, to succeed, go to the University of Angeli in Crusader, get a degree in, I believe, politics and economics, or business. He was a business leader. And immediately after getting out of college, well, in college and immediately after college, he began to get involved in the anti-Mezzer movement, a large political movement that had been existing for hundreds of years, off and on, to try to overthrow the Mezzers, return the UEE to more of a democratic state. And he was very, very good at it. He was very good at organizing. He was very good at getting people together. He quickly became the leader just because of how organized and efficient he was at his job. So when he organized a group to go to a big rally in Terra to protest the Mezzers, he unfortunately was unable to join his fellows because he was sick. He came down with the flu. So he missed the transport. But that transport then exploded as it was leaving orbit, which was pretty obviously an assassination attempt by the Mezzers, by the Advocacy, who were at the time effectively secret police, to silence him. And his compatriots were worried that he was going to be in target for more assassinations, and they had to get him out of the UEE. So he was smuggled through what's known as the Bremen Beltway, which was a group of smugglers plus some more friendly Bremen Defense Force members would move political dissidents out of the UEE through Bremen and through Tohill into Xi'an space, where all of the expatriates would then be brought to a specific planet where they would live outside of Xi'an, the Xi'an Empire, but they would effectively protect these human radicals. And then when the Tide Revolution, the anti-Mezzer revolution happened in 2792, he was smuggled back into the UEE to help coordinate and lead these efforts. And at the end of that revolution, he found himself as a political player in the verse, quickly becoming a member of the new regime changes, new UEE, to try to fix the problems, and found out that it was really difficult to get anything done because of all of the political entrenchments of the anti-Mezzer revolution. I go over this a lot in other videos, but I will just give you the quick and dirty that the anti-Mezzer revolution was more of a compromise than it was a full revolution. It wasn't necessarily that people were upset about the Mezzers. They were just upset about the system. They were upset that the Mezzers were abusing the system. And so if it was a combination of conservatives who were done with the system and radicals who were more wanting to completely overhaul the system. And they compromised after the revolution with the new UEE to kind of make a less overtly evil organization that's called the UEE, which is still trying to be reformed by people like the transitionalists and being resisted by the people like the centralists, with the universalists who are kind of in the middle, trying to keep a middle way if possible. Dunlow found out that this was just too difficult to try to manage. He couldn't get any meaningful change happening. So he left government and he bought a company named Seraphim Systems. Now, Seraphim Systems was a struggling shuttle manufacturer. And so when he purchased it, he didn't want to get rid of the CEO and everything. He eventually just became the board of directors. The chairman of the board. And the CEO at the time, who was the original CEO and founder, was very religious. And the reason why she had named Seraphim Systems was because she was, angels, and she was very, very Christian. And Dunlow wanted to change the name because he realized as a businessman that this was not a very good name for, lots of reasons in the UEE. But they both wanted to do the same thing. They both wanted to use their company to affect change in the universe. Her through her deep religiousness and him through his own personal experience. So he sat in a room with her for, I think, a day and talked it out with her, and they came up with a compromise to name their company Crusader Industries, which is what we have Crusader today. The shuttles did pretty well, but one of the biggest problems they were having with the shuttle manufacturing was more getting to market, because during this time period in the early 29th century, there was, as I've mentioned before, a cargo crisis. Lots of cargo companies were out of business. Most of the companies that were producing cargo ships were out of business because they were all had really close ties with the Mezzers. So it was difficult to get goods and services from point A to point B. So Dunlow was talking with one of his plant managers, who made some comment to the effect of, if we could make our own transports, we wouldn't have these problems, because they were having these major delays. And Dunlow basically said, do it. Make your own transport. So they designed and built a new transport to transport their shuttles to market. And they called it the Jupiter. And this is the first ship that Crusader Industries ever made that was quantum capable, quantum and jump capable. People saw that the Jupiter was also fairly robust and reliable. Crusader became, because of their original shuttles and eventually the Jupiter, their design was more to be robust, easy to fix and maintain, but reliable. A upscale Drake or Misc, less heavy industrial and more general purpose. So the Jupiter became very popular, began to be sold. They went into personal transports and made a people mover, which would eventually, the second generation of that would eventually become the Genesis Starliner. But this would eventually lead Crusader to having a interesting relationship with the UAE military, which would lead to the creation of the Starlifter. They also eventually would make things like the Star Runner, the Genesis Starliner, and the Ares Starfighter. August Dunlow would not see all of these. He would run the company for about 5 decades, eventually retire, with the new CEO taking over, who was Kelly Kaplan, one of his proteges, who had helped design the Genesis Starliner project in the first place, and she was the one who would eventually purchase Crusader, the gas giant, which is where Orison is, which is where Invictus is this year. So that's a long story, but that's Crusader in a nutshell. With that all being said, let's look at some of these ships and talk a little bit about the history. So these are the Hercules Starlifters. There are 3 versions, but I believe the one in the back is the one that's important. Now, this is one right here. The M2 is the original Starlifter. Now, I've said this story many, many times. I'll say it very shortly again, but please do watch the other videos, because it's the same story as to why the Valkyrie and the... I'm blanking on the other name. The Redeemer. Why they both exist. It's the same story. There is a study done in the mid-28th century reviewing the losses, the victories and losses in the Second Tevaran War, and they realized that they had a problem with the logistics. The UE military needed to fix their logistics. They needed to get something to be able to take goods and heavy equipment and heavy troops, like elite troops, to the battlefield, straight to the battlefield. And one of the things they needed was a heavy transport, heavy armored transport that could go from quantum to surface. And that was the beginnings of Starlift Command. And Starlift Command needed a Starlifter and needed something to be able to carry these. So they sent out a proposal for a heavy armored transport to carry things like tanks to the front lines, and lots of troops and heavy equipment and other heavy vehicles. And many people applied, including Aegis and Anvil, but also Crusader. This is in 28, let me look at the exact date so I can tell you exactly. This was in 2814. This is barely after the founding of Crusader, maybe a couple years after the creation of the Jupiter. Crusader effectively rolled the dice and brought out a production model, or came out with an idea that the military was not expecting. And they actually liked it because Crusader's reliability, its simplicity, and its multi-purpose nature, how Crusader builds most of its ships, appealed to their need for something that could go from quantum to ground and not require a ton of parts changes and be pretty easy to work with. Thus was the creation of the Hercules Star Lifter, also known as the M2 for military version. M standing for military. So the M2 Star Lifter was built and was used in its first engagement by the UE Marines to silence a pirate outpost, and was so effective at its job because the pirates were not expecting the Marines to be able to deploy tanks right at their front door, literally knocking on their front door, that there was not a single Marine lost. And they were able to capture the base intact and a bunch of intel as well, proving that the Starlifter was exactly what the UE needed. Since then, it hasn't really been used in active combat. It hasn't been used for its main purpose, which is to retake Vanduul systems, but it has been used for aid organizations and the military to help defend and quickly mobilize forces, especially the Marines like to use these a lot now, these alongside the vanguards. Now, it took a while, but after Crusader created this, they created something called the roll and go mechanism. This is the brainchild of Kelly Kaplan, who is the founder, not the founder, but the second CEO and the current CEO of Crusader Industries. The idea was that you could build a fabrication system that would, you just have to move some slight parts here and there. You could do it all automated as long as you just push a couple of buttons, and it would be able to create a customized version of that ship on the fly on the same building platforms as the generic versions. This system was in place as it was designed for the Genesis Starlifter and was then modified for the Genesis Starliner, and was modified for the Hercules Starlifter. And in the overcoming, like in the 2930s, I think, or 2950s, between 2930 and 2950, the Crusader Industries came out with two new Starlifters for the civilian market. They made the M2s available, obviously, through the Militia Mobilization Initiative, which I've talked about a lot here, but effectively after the attack on Vega 2, there was a lot of need for people to take care of themselves, and so the military was much more willing to let companies sell military-grade technology to militias and frontier patrols, so they didn't have to send out military expeditions to secure systems. But thus, M2s are being sold to the public, but along those same lines, you have the C2, which is an unarmored version of the same ship, which is able to carry a little bit more because of that. And the A2, which is an assault dropship. It's a bomber version, really. It's the M2 with bombs and more guns, designed for security and militia use, but also still can carry just about as much as the regular Hercules can. Now, from this ship, we're going to move on to the other major ships of Crusader, which are the Starfighter, the Ares, and the Star Runner, the Mercury. All right, here we are in this hallway. This is the first time we've actually seen this hallway with more Crusader ships. We're going to start with the Star Runner. Now, it's important to note that the earliest recorded date we have associated with the Star Runner is 2946. It could have been from earlier, likely has, but the Star Runner at its core is a data runner. Now, for those of you who are new to Star Citizen, you may not know that what data runner is as a profession. Now, a data runner is, well, think about this today. Today, we use a currency, hard currency, but most of our currency, most of our daily transactions are used through digital data. Just simpler to use that way. Use cards and debit cards and all sorts of things. You get paid, you probably don't even receive a paper paycheck anymore. It just goes straight into your bank. You never see it except for around tax time, unless you request those things. It's all data in the system. Star Citizen is similar. The UEC is more of a digital currency. It's not cryptocurrency, but it's a digital currency. It does seem to have some physical aspects from it, but that's what it is. On top of that, data is very important in the Star Citizen universe. Things change all the time, and new map updates, new stock information, all sorts of things need to get passed around. The problem is that there's no faster than light communication in Star Citizen. There are some things that can circumnavigate faster than light, but none of them are very useful except for jump points. Now, the problem with using jump points for communication is that you have to physically load all of the information you want onto some sort of disk or some sort of storage device and then transport it through a jump point. And it's not really secure. How most transmissions go through, the simplest way to transmit information is through the relay system, the comm relay system, the Asiato comm relay system. You send a message, it gets picked up by whatever comm relay is nearby, and that is then delivered via, not faster than light, but, light speed communication to each point-to-point communications relay until it reaches a jump point. And then all that information is downloaded into a probe, which is then fired through the jump point to the other side where another Asiato relay exists for another, to transfer that information back to the relay, and then it's just passed along down that line. Pretty simple. Problem is that the time it takes to load all this information into a probe and send it through a jump point could take some time, because those probes are likely going to wait until they're full of information before they're fully physically sent. So what we have is the profession of a data runner, someone with a very fast ship and a lot of storage space that can then send information. You just load it up onto that drive, onto a ship, and that ship will then do a courier run directly to where you need it to go. And these runs are often faster and more secure than your typical data runner. Let me show you what I mean by this. See if I can't. There's the door. Yep. So, you come back here, and I'll show you, because I own one of these ships, so I'll show you this cheap and secret way of getting in there. This ship comes with racks and racks of servers. These are all data information servers. If you have the Herald, you'll see something similar. But the Star Runner was designed to fit into this role. Now, as you saw down below here, it also has a nice large cargo bay for other purposes as well. It also has found some usage by smugglers, because if you look over here, I'll show you the secretness. This is where all the engineering stuff is. Down here, let's see if I can get the door open. Where is that door? There's some sort of door handle somewhere. Can't find the secret door. This is actually opens up into a secret passage into a under section, which you can not be detected by some scanners in some cases. So that area behind there is used sometimes to smuggle secret information. It wasn't really intended like that in the first place. But the Star Runner, because of its multi-purpose nature, was first and foremost, obviously, a data runner, but it was also designed to transport goods and other things fast, including breaking through blockades if need be, because blockades aren't always done by legal means. Sometimes they're done by illegal means. So all of those things in mind, the Star Runner was made to be fast, reliable, rugged. And to prove this, they entered it into the Able Baker Challenge. Now, the Able Baker Challenge takes place in the versus only, right at the point, binary star system. And the thing about the Able Baker Challenge is that it's less of a race and more of an endurance, less of a typical timed race, more of an endurance trial. The planets and moons of the system are entirely hostile to everything, in some cases to ships themselves. And almost always the race has some sort of route through between the two stars, in the very narrow area between the two stars where we won't be burned to pieces or ripped apart. And the thing about the Able Maker Challenge is that it changes every year. It's a different course every year. It's not technically legal, but it's not illegal because the system it's in is, I don't think, UEE territory. So by Crusader entering their ship 2 years in a row and completing it in 2 years means that the Star Runner was at its very inception designed to be impossibly tough, fast, and maneuverable for a ship of its size. It has proven very popular with smugglers. Probably the most popular one being probably the most notable one or infamous one is the Belligerent Duck, which is by one, I forget her name. I know it's Alex. Real quick. I don't have it on the list on here. Dang. All right. Well, Dugan. Alex Dugan. That's her name. Alex Dugan, who is with her cohort, a Banu named Mazhulan. There's an entire story series based off of her life, as well as a video which was served as the kind of commercial, a 2-part video called Reunion, which you can watch, which talks about the Belligerent Duck and Alex Dugan. So it's pretty infamous, but it is used for legitimate purposes, including courier and transport missions as well. It's used by the UEE effectively as a armed courier vessel, as a info runner if it needs be, by the UEE military, as well as for transport, if high risk transports if need be. Then we have the newest ship. Now, this ship does not have a ton of lore behind it. It is very, very recent, like the last 2 years. The story that we know so far is that Bearing Applied which is a company that makes most of the major weapons. If you've seen all of those cool videos of people getting absolutely wrecked by the Bengals cannons, they make those. They also make the P4 and the P8. The Bearing Applied makes pretty much all of the major and minor weapons in the UEE. They developed a brand new specialized size 7 gun, and they needed something to test it out. So they partnered with Crusader to build a platform for that gun, and that platform became the Ares Starfighter. We don't know if it is used by the UEE military. I wouldn't be surprised if the Bearing Size 7 program was sponsored by the UEE military, so I wouldn't be surprised if these are active in the UEE military, but they were effectively designed with their guns designed with ships around them, and that's what the Ares is. There's 2 different versions of this. There's the Ion, which is this over here, which is an energy size 7, and the Inferno, which is a ballistic size 7 with a Gatling gun on it. So both of them are quite common these days, but they're still fairly new in terms of the universe and are sold to the civilian and military markets. With that, let's continue on and talk a little bit about Musashi Industrial Starflight Concern. Alrighty, here we are at the Misc section of the tour. Misc has an interesting history. Originally, Misc was founded from a merger of 2 companies. The Musashi Lifestyle Design Unit from ACOM, which is a spinoff of ACOM, and the Hato Electronics Corporation. Both are from the planet of Saisei in the Centauri system. Saisei is the major large planet in the Centauri system. It is one of the most beautiful planets in the UEE. It's one of the older planets in the UEE, and one of the more influential ones besides, say, Croshaw and Terra. So Misc, Musashi Industrial Starfleet Concern, was created on Saisei in the middle of the cargo crisis. It was built specifically to deal with the problem that was facing everyone at the time. And so when they were formed, their first major inroad into ship design and ship construction was the Hull series, the Hull A, B, C, D, and E. These were designed to fix the problem that the UE was having. No cargo vessels or no parts for the older cargo vessels, then just build a cargo vessel that can carry twice as much as anything else. Just bolt it to the side. And this design was so reliable, so popular, that it actually expanded beyond human space. The Xi'an began to take Hull series ships and use them themselves for transportation. There's a reason why the lore team talks about how the Hull C is the most common ship in the verse. It is dirt common. It is everywhere, all the time. And it's not even just in human space. It's also in Xi'an space. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in Banu space. I'm not surprised if Tavaran use it. I really wouldn't be surprised if the Vandul had their own versions of it somewhere. The Hull C is a super common design because it's simple, it's rugged, and it's industrial. All the things which are the hallmarks of Misc. Rugged, industrial, and simple to operate. Remember, I've talked about how Crusader is simple, but less industrial and more kind of overall general. Misc is the industrial side of that. And I'm sure people ask about Grey Cat, but that's more of a mining and operations, and Argo is more of a infrastructure. This is industrial, commercial. Once the Hull became super popular, both the UE military and the Xi'an government reached out. The Xi'an government would eventually reach out for, well, let's talk about the UE military first. The UE military would reach out because during the program of their next program, after the Hull series, was the Starlift. That's the wrong one. The Starfarer. The Starfarer was built to deal with another problem which has been a constant in the Star Citizen universe, which is infrastructure. There is a significant lack of infrastructure outside of the main core worlds, and there needed to be some sort of way to refuel and refuel ships on the go. Not just refuel ships, but something that could act as a mobile refinery for fuel. In comes the Starfarer. So the Starfarer was built by Misc to fill this problem. And the UE military immediately saw the advantages of having a ship that could collect gases and turn them into fuel and refine everything from hydrogen, different versions of hydrogen, to quantum fuel for refueling on the go. So they approached Misc and said, hey, could you make a military version of this ship? And Misc said, sure. And then freaked out because they have no idea how to make a military ship because they're not a military manufacturer. So they did something which is odd. They reached out to Aegis Dynamics, who were kind of in the shithouse at the time. They were not very well liked because of their connections with the Mezzers at this time period, but Misc had nowhere else to go. So they reached out to Aegis and asked them, because they had experience with dealing with the UE military and what they wanted, and Aegis accepted, and they worked with Misc to create what's known as the Starfarer Gemini, and that's what, Gemini, which is this ship right here. It's a up-armored, up-gunned version of the Starfarer. It has all the same major benefits of the Starfarer, but with big missiles and big guns and much tougher armor. All right. So then we have the next major revolution. Shortly after the Starfarer, the Misc wanted to move more into a less of a specialized and more of a general industry vehicle. They wanted something that could bridge the gap between big companies and independent contractors. So they started to develop the Freelancer. Now, before they developed the Freelancer, the Xi'an came calling, especially Aopoa, the major company, one of the major companies that creates Xi'an technology, or creates Xi'an ships. And together, Misc and Aopoa, I believe it's Aopoa, discussed a technological exchange, because the Xi'an wanted permission to be able to build their own Misc whole series ships, but they needed the actual plans to build them. And in exchange, the Xi'an would give thruster technology and other technology to Misc to help them improve their own efficiencies. The thing that the Xi'an ships have always had over human ships is that their thrusters are not built the way that we think of planes. Most human ships are built still like planes or rockets, where the thrust is at the back and you have maneuverable thrusters that are placed around the ship, but the main thrusters are in the back. Xi'an ships, their main thrusters are their maneuvering thrusters. They gimbal around and move and slide more easily. So they're much more nimble and often faster than human ships, though they're a little bit more frail. So after this exchange, we see the creation of the Freelancer. Now, the Freelancer is built partially with Xi'an maneuvering technologies set into these engines. The Freelancer, originally the base Freelancer, was built at the end of the 29th century and was very, very popular, quickly becoming one of the more favorite sort of space trucks for your average goer, your average spacer. And because it became super popular with not just trucks as the kind of a trade professions, but also exploration vessels, because it could easily be used for exploration and survey because of its longer range. Misc decided they were going to expand their Freelancer series with new variants. So they came out with 3 new variants of the Freelancer fairly recently in the 30th century. They came out with the Freelancer MIS, and Freelancer DUR, which is for duration, for long duration flights. The Freelancer Max, which is effectively a Freelancer with double the thrusters and double the cargo capacity for larger cargo runs. And the Freelancer MIS, which stands for Missile, which is a secret Q ship, a missile boat. And that is the one that was designed to work specifically with the military. It's not clear if it's actually used by the UE military, but we do know that many of these vessels are used by the merchant marines, so they could be. This right here is the size 7 missile tubes. These will pop out of the top in a specialized container to triple the amount of missiles that are available for a typical Freelancer. Furthering this development, Misc eventually would develop something that is the ultimate adaptation of Xi'an technology in the Reliant. Reliant was released in the 2940s and was designed as kind of their stab at the beginner market, at the very early market, at the most common market for spaceship owners. The thing that the Reliant has is, you notice it's just a flying wing. Well, in flight, you can convert this from having just this wing to vertical. So it flips vertical, which is almost identical to what Xi'an ships do when they're in flight. The major difference between this and other ships is that there are actually 2 seats in the front, which will gimbal as well. One for the pilot and one for a secondary operator, which will operate in this case as a turret. There are multiple different variants. This is the military variant, or the militia variant known as the Tana, which has some pretty nasty guns on it and a lot of missiles. It effectively is effectively like a miniature Vanguard in many cases in terms of just how much guns and missiles it already has, and has a much longer range than a typical starting vessel with even, like, say, the LN or the Delta, which have more, which are cheaper but less fighty, I guess. And the cool thing about the Tana as well, for people who are interested in it, is that it's almost the perfect ship for mercenaries, because it has 2 beds in it, it has a shoilet, a shower toilet, and it has gun racks, storage, and a tiny little 1 SCU cargo area, so you can carry a little bit of extra cargo as well. So it's perfect for that 1 or 2 person crew that wants to go out and do mercenary missions, but also do a little bit of fighting in space. Last but not least, we're going to talk about the Razer. Now, the Razer is an interesting creation. It was built during the same time as the Freelancer by a brand new CEO who wanted to try to move Misc away from just being industrial, to try to strike out and do something different. And the goal was to build a ship that would win the Murray Cup. So they created a ship that did terribly. And eventually that ship would be developed over time. It would be, I think, eventually abandoned. But when the Xi'an tech came through and the Misc had a little bit more experience with using Xi'an tech, they decided to dip back into this program and attempt to recreate a ship that would win the Murray Cup. And they did with the Razer. This is all built with Xi'an technology as well as other new techniques that they had learned since their initial attempt. And this became not only a ship that was used by the for racing, but this version right here, which is the Razer EX. This one is a special forces ship. This is going to sound weird, but this ship is a stealth ship. This has a very low radar signature, and it still has some decent guns on it. It's designed to get one pilot, possibly with multiple ships like this, secretly into a certain location, ditch their small ship, be able to hide it, and return to it later if they need to. Now, well, I don't know if it's entirely designed for this as either, but there is also some gameplay application because at one point you could kind of get on top of this nose here, crouch down, and a pilot who was flying this could fly you up into space with you on the exterior on the nose if they were careful enough because of the way that the ship was designed. I don't know if that was intended, but it sounded like it would be a cool lore thing, so who knows. It's still in active use by both the Advocacy and the UEE Marines who use this ship for these covert stealth infiltrations. With that all said, let's go talk about the older of all of these ship manufacturers. It's not really a ship manufacturer, but as I like to call it, the last great car manufacturer in an age of space travel. All right, now let's talk about Tumbril Land Systems, the 4th oldest company in the Star Citizen universe. It's not easy being a car manufacturer in an age of space travel, but Tumbril manages to do it. It was first founded in 2536, 416 years ago. And it was founded by a couple, 2 people named Kavaya and Aaron. Kavaya Crosby and Aaron Dews. Now, Kavaya was the daughter of 2 maintenance workers, effectively, for the University of Saisei. They both worked in an outpost on the planet of Yar, which is another planet in the Centauri system, which is covered with red sand. It's constantly shifting red sand. They messed up the terraforming pretty badly, and it is a very abandoned system. It once had a lot of minerals, but eventually was stripped clean, so it is it's dotted with empty outposts, and its only landing zone is a very small Western frontier-style town. But the University of Saisei has purchased a bunch of these old abandoned outposts and repurposed them for research. And her parents were in charge of maintaining one of these outposts. So she was raised on one of these outposts remotely in the deserts and kind of helped between her studies, which she often would study under professors who would become visiting to do research on various aspects of the planet, between her studies and her parents, who would help teach her how to work as an engineer, to maintain and to build new, as a mechanic and engineer, maintain and build new systems. And one of the things they had in their collection was a Crossfire Land Cruiser. Now, up to this point, because of the popularity and ease of use of spaceships, ground vehicles had become almost extinct. Outside of, say, Argo's train networks, there was very few ground transportation systems by the 26th century. Lots of things were done which were stupid in the 26th century. There's an entire different story about how they almost got rid of ballistic ammo for, like, radiation and chemical rounds for some reason. But, until Gemini saved it. But, in this time period, very few ground vehicles remained. It was very difficult to get your hands on them. But the Crosbys had managed to get a hold of an old Crossfire Land Cruiser, which was designed as an all-terrain vehicle with a enclosed canopy. Then, in 2518, Aaron Dews arrived with his mother, Meredith Dews. Meredith was a researcher who was researching plants that could survive in the harsh climate of Yar. If they could survive the harsh climate of Yar, they could survive in pretty much any environment. So she planted them all over the sands of Yar and lived in the research outpost. And she would go out in the mornings and evenings and check on her plants, bring them back for study. Well, one morning she left to go to check on her plants, and she didn't come back. And a sandstorm started to kick up. One of the many sandstorms would kick up, which would be deadly if she'd get lost or worse. So Aaron panicked, and so Kavaya's father and Kavaya and Aaron jumped into the Land Cruiser and began to go look for Aaron's mother. And with luck, only because of the Land Cruiser, they were able to find her half buried unconscious in a sand dune, pull her out and save her life. And because of this, Aaron became very close to the Crosbys, specifically Kavaya. And they were both teenagers, 16, 17 years old at this time. And as time went on, Aaron and Kavaya became closer, started to date. I believe Aaron is slightly older than Kavaya, so he went off to college first, and then Kavaya followed after him. And they eventually would go to college. He would go into college for business. She would go into college for engineering. After college, they got married. Both got really good jobs in Saisei and a very nice apartment. And about 3 or 4 years into the relationship, they were both like, "We are bored. This is boring. This is nothing like what how we were raised." So they began to try to recapture that feeling. And one of the things they were talking with one another about was the Land Cruiser, because after they had saved his mother, one of the things that Kavaya and Aaron did to grow closer was work on the Land Cruiser. So they said, why don't we go back and build our own? Because they'd always thought about building their own. She was an engineer. He was a businessman. They could make it work. So they quit their jobs, got a job working in it's a little more complicated because they were happy but stagnant, and they were kind of a little bit not too happy with their work lives. And then Kavaya's parents were dying, so they made the trip back to their outpost where they had met and took care of her parents as she was dying. And then that's when they came up with the idea of, because the Land Cruiser was still there, of kind of building their own version of the Land Cruiser to make something that could be sold. So they quit their jobs and took Kavaya's parents' old job with the university to maintain the facility. So they maintained the facility while also working on their own ground vehicle. They worked night and day, and they actually began to form a company called Tumbril Land Systems, named after a little two-wheeled cart that was used. It was a trailer that was used for their old Land Cruiser. They took it apart for parts to use for their new buggy, and they created what they would be eventually call the DX. The actual name of it, DX-20. It was built to handle Yar, which meant it could handle any environment with ease. It was really fun to drive. It was efficient. It was a fantastic buggy, and nobody cared. But they believed in their full system. They founded the company. They began to sell DX-20s, and still worked as their on the outpost, but didn't do well. And then The First Tavaran War happened. 2540, 42, I think. So only a couple years later, the First Tavaran War happened. And after the first year of the UPE getting its butt kicked left and right, they realized they needed some sort of ground vehicle to help counter a lot of the problems they were experiencing with the more nimble and mobile Tavaran forces. So they called literally every manufacturer that made land vehicles together for trials to try to figure out if they could take an existing civilian vessel or civilian vehicle and convert it for military use. And the DX-20 blew them all away. The DX-20 was hands just, it was just so above everything else that existed because it was new compared to the other ones, which were at sometimes hundreds of years old, and it required almost no modifications. Just something to put a gun on top of it and some armor, and it was fine. It almost didn't impair its performance almost at all. And it became the main vehicle for the UPE army, and it was used everywhere. It was the most common sight for the army, period, in the First Tavaran War. And the soldiers loved it. Absolutely loved it. It was easy to maintain, easy to drive, could take anything, and was rugged, took a lot of hits from Tavaran attacks, and could get people where they needed to go and get out of combat if they needed to. And because of this, after the war, they all bought DX-20s. So Tumbril became super wealthy. The two would eventually retire, but they eventually made things like the Nova to Tamora, the C series, and when the Second Tavaran War happened, then Mesr II came to Tumbril and said, we need you to do it again. We need you to help out to a new DX-20. And so they created the Nova. Let's talk a little bit about the Nova here. Well, actually, we'll continue the story and then I'll come down and talk about this. The Nova tank. The Nova tank is probably the most iconic vehicle of the Second Tavaran War. It has become one of the more iconic vehicles of the UPE army for its record in battle, specifically around the Battle of Korean Pass. After the war, they continued to make weapons or vehicles for the military and civilians forces, but eventually the Mesrs would stop buying military Tumbrils. So they decided that they were going to shift to more commercial aspects, but that didn't work. By the mid of the mid 29th century, Tumbril was effectively, and they shuttered their doors in 2862. Now, recently, in the last 7 years, Tumbril was repurchased, the IP and everything, by a Tumbril enthusiast named, what's his name? Terrence Naban. So once Tumbril shut its doors, people began to buy Tumbrils all over the place because they were reliable. Even though people weren't using them, there was still a need for them. So when Terrence Naban had the chance to buy Tumbril Land Systems' entire catalog and their IP completely back, their whole company, he did, and refounded Tumbril Land Systems with the belief, because he himself was a huge proponent of Tumbril and ground vehicles, and did so with the utmost confidence. He made it his main company compared to his previous company, which was called DevCro Group, which was very good at taking small companies and kind of building them up and expanding them. He 100% put his efforts behind this because this was his passion project. He had a garage full of old Tumbril vehicles that he himself had maintained and fixed up and got ready to go. So with that all learned, well, let's talk about the older vehicles and we'll talk about his new, because after he got started, he launched what we know today as the Cyclone. But first, let's talk about the Nova tank. So as I said, Nova tank is the hero of Korean Pass. It is one of the major vehicles of the UEE Army, as well as the UEE Marines. It is fairly large for a tank, I should say. It's important. I've heard a lot of people talk about these vehicles and like, why is it so big? This would make no sense. It's like, because there's no crouching really, and you got to make sure that like AI can walk around. Because you have to make a tank where you can walk around in it, it's going to be fairly large. But it's a crew of 3 with an autoloader. You have a gunner, you have a commander, and you have a driver. The commander can operate the 2 twin-linked size 2 guns on the top, as well as the missile batteries. The gunner can operate the main cannon. The driver can drive. The driver can also operate the other ones, all of those other systems as well, but it's a lot more difficult for them to operate at all. These were brought back into service after the refounding of Tumbril, specifically to deal with the Tavaran War. I'm sorry, Tavaran War. The Vanduul War. The newest Vanduul threat. These were brought back into service and repurchased by the military. It seems like they had them in stock and they were still using them, but you can think of this as the Nova Mark II, as the updated version of the Nova for modern military use. And of course, Militia Mobilization Initiative, now you can buy a tank. Now, here is the first major return to form for Tumbril, the Cyclone. Now, the Cyclone is built for many different purposes. You have the AA, the MT, the RN, and the TR. So this is, and the base Cyclone. I believe this is the RN, which is a racing version of it. It's designed for speed, pure, unbridled speed with a tiny little bit of, oh no, it doesn't have cargo bay here. It's much faster than any of the other ones. A typical Cyclone, the base version, will have this little area open for, oh, this is the recon version. I'm sorry. I'm screwing this up. This one is not the speed version. This is the recon version where it actually has, it can drop probes, I believe. That's right. Beacons to set waypoints for future travel if need be. See, even the lore guy gets things mixed up sometimes. It's like, what? That's a little radar dish up there. This is the TR. This is the scout variant of it. The TR is a military scout with a size 1 ballistic cannon on top, ballistic Gatling on top. It has space for 3 occupants. People like to call it the Warthog for obvious reasons. This is the AA version. Now, even though it's designed for anti-aircraft, these are size 2 missiles, I believe. These are actually can target ground vehicles as well. So it turns this into not just an anti-aircraft target, but also a missile battery if you need it to. It also has an EMP, which is I think 500 meters range, so it can actually EMP targets that get too close. So it's a very versatile little buggy, a little rocket delivery system. And then we've got the heavy boy, the MT. Now, the MT is similar to the TR, but whereas the TR is more of a scout variant, this is more of an assault variant. It has a size 2 cannon, ballistic cannon on board, plus size 3 missiles, 4 size 3 missiles on it, designed for pure frontline combat. These have been very, very useful, used for defense, scouting for purposes, for many different purposes throughout the UEE, and have become quite essential to much of the military's, especially the Army's, day-to-day operations. With that all said, with the Cyclone and the Nova, let's look at what's up next for both. Blanking on the names. Let's look at what's up next. Ships and vehicles which are not in the verse yet, but may already be in the verse. With the first one being the Ranger. Now, the Ranger is interesting because the Ranger is built with both civilian and military in mind. Now, this, I believe, is the TR. Yeah. The TR version of the Ranger has some very hefty guns on it. The civilian version, I believe, does not have guns, but it does have a space for a second seat / cargo. There's also a version that has extra cargo, and I believe there's a version that's just a racer. These were designed, these are effectively offshoots of the Cyclone program, designed to make even lighter, faster, more maneuverable ground vehicles with what they had learned with the Cyclone, since the Cyclone is the first original Tumbril idea for almost 100 years. And they're not quite done yet. Even in the verse, they're not quite ready to go. But they are, there are some early models which are out, which are being used by civilians and the military. Especially the Marines love the TR for scout purposes. And I believe the Advocacy uses them as well. All right, and then we have the Misc Odyssey. This is a brand new ship as well. It's not quite out yet. As far as we know, its early versions of the ship were released the end of last year, 2951. But this is designed as a forward exploration ship. It's designed as less of an exploration ship in the same way as the Carrack and more as a exploration platform. It has its own in-situ refueling option with a refinery which can refine quantum fuel, and a mining head that allows you to mine quantanium and then convert it into quantum fuel. It also has a extra small hangar in it, which allows for you to put up to, I think, things like terrapins into it to extend its range and extend its abilities. It has a lot of other features added to it, but like I said, it's not dedicated exploration, more of a platform for exploration. You do a lot of different modes as well. It is very well liked. I believe that Jax McCleary liked to say it's like a floating space station, like a remote space station, which fills in that role for industrial purposes that Misc likes to have pretty well. Those are the ships on the floor for Crusader, Misc, and Tumbril for Invictus 2952. Come on down to the floor and rent them. Try them out yourselves for the next couple of days. And thank you for watching. I'm sorry I screwed up a little bit more on this one. I kind of blanked a little bit. As this week goes on, I'm going to get more tired doing these every 2 days. Just my voice is dying as this is going on. But thank you for watching. If you did enjoy this, hit that like button. Make sure you comment down below. What is your favorite ships of these? Which of those are you looking forward to, the Ranger or the Odyssey? Which of these manufacturers do you like the lore of? Do you have any more questions about any of that? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to the Astropub. Hit me up on Patreon. Let me know again if you want to see things like Ko-fi or memberships added to the channel. And like I say every time, hope to see you someday in the black. And remember, ex Historia ad Astra.